on the most watched channel, on the most watched show, viewers. There are several messages being beamed out of the Kazan chapter of the Brics summit, where Russian President Vladimir Putin has pulled out all the stops to host world leaders from a growing list of more than 20 nations. You can see those pictures. The first among these is that a new non-West age of global diplomacy is finally taking credible shape. Global diplomacy, viewers. This is clear from the fact that more countries are preparing to invest and even risk tremendous amounts of diplomatic capital by joining a grouping that defines itself as an alternative to a United States-dominated Western global order. This is a far cry from 2009, when Brics comprised of only 5 members and it got going in a very low-key fashion. Then the world was a very different place. The United States was the undisputed hegemon, with few ready to challenge its superiority. The US had, after all, decimated Afghanistan and Iraq, and everyone seemed to buy into the Washington-scripted righteous spin given to the twin invasions. They said they were doing it for a just cause. But then, viewers, soon after, the US betrayed the trust of the world. Reports emerged that beyond the declared wars, it was pursuing several alleged, quote, secret wars, unquote, as part of its global war on terror and under a, quote, strained interpretation of constitutional self-defense, unquote. In other words, viewers, it was carrying out illegal insurgencies, propping up various insurgents and affecting regime change. It continues to do that, viewers, of course, we know that. It does it even in Bangladesh, as recently as 2 months ago. That's what is said. Now, some in the global south even trace the roots of antagonism that resulted in the Ukraine conflict to this kind of adventurism. In fact, the Ukraine war and the weaponization of sanctions by the United States can be credited for driving the growth of Brics from a club of 5 countries to 9, with at least 3 dozen more nations keen to join. Putin says there are 30 knocking on the doors. Each of these, including some US allies like Thailand, etc., have reasons to be anxious of untrammeled US-led Anglosphere's hegemony. Second, viewers, the second big message, that the growing Brics bloc that is beginning to display greater diversity can better drive consensus on a myriad of concerns afflicting the global south than a smaller grouping seemingly dominated by China's priorities. Up until the Brics was restricted to a 5-nation bloc, members like South Africa and India were wary of the Russo-Chinese attempt at turning the grouping into an anti-West axis. This fear meant that the bloc couldn't unite behind its original purpose of being the pivot for reforming global governance. Now, with more members and greater diffusion of expectations, the bloc can reflect the more reformist reasons for which it was forged in the first place. Third message coming out of Kazan: the expanded Brics Plus, some experts think, will also allow the forum's members to apply collective pressure on the US-led West, that it needs to do more to win the trust of the global south. Viewers, you know what has been happening with the US deep state, propping up various kinds of individuals. I don't need to go into that. A world where the West is more responsive to the views, concerns, and needs of the global south can only be a better one. Of course, there will be many cynics who may continue to write off Brics as an incohesive bloc addled by inherent contradictions and rivalries amongst its constituents. Some of this is true, but viewers, it is also being said that these naysayers will be doing so at their own risk. Many other groupings like the G7 and G20, not to mention several UN fora, also grapple with their own internal divisions. In the end analysis, the biggest message from Kazan might simply be that Brics Plus is here to stay, and that the US-led West hegemony might finally be waning. It might finally have a challenger. Let's open this up, viewers. We have some stellar experts to talk a little bit about this reshaping, this credible reshaping of what we are seeing in Kazan. And I want to first begin with senior journalist who joins me from Moscow in Russia. And she's been speaking on these issues, writing about them. Ms. Kukreva, thank you very much for speaking to CNN News 18 tonight. I want to ask you, a lot of people are saying that we're seeing a redefinition of the global order where we can now see that whether we agree or not, that there is the beginning of the waning of the West. How do you respond to people who are saying these things? Do you believe this to be true?
Oh, I believe that what we're seeing today is extraordinary, truly extraordinary, because we see countries coming together, countries like India and China and Russia in the middle, that has relationships with both of those countries. These countries also coming together, to discuss the issues that need to be discussed, to further build on relationships that for some people, we've heard this for years, building up of this controversy that, that India and China have so many issues that they don't agree on. And yet we see a summit and we see an organization that keeps growing. I remember when Brics just started and it was just this small group of countries. And now today we have 36 countries coming together for a summit of the group that essentially, technically right now, it's 10 states. And yet we see a growing interest of states wanting to join into this dialogue, into this redefinition of international relations, if you want, if you know what I mean. It is an extraordinary alliance of states that have their vision, and they're not intimidated to talk about it to each other.
Right. Well, that's an interesting perspective coming straight out of Russia, Mr. Chileni. Let me ask you this. Does the growth of Brics prove that more and more countries are now convinced that the US-led Anglosphere is perhaps on the decline, or quite frankly, doesn't sort of at any level respect their freedom, sovereignty, call it what you want to?
Both things are right, Rahul. Brics is becoming a magnet to pluralize the global order. With the rise of new powers and the continuing decline of the West's share of the global GDP, the shifting balance of power is transforming global geopolitics and corroding the US-led economic order. Now, in place of one power dominating the world, a multipolar world is emerging. That is crystal clear. And as a new age of international relations dawns, the role of the non-Western world is assuming increasing importance. Against this background, the Brics grouping, the Brics is the world's first major non-US international initiative. That's what makes it important. Brics today symbolizes the eroding dominance of the West, which accounts for just 12% of the global population. But as the West's power and influence decline, countries seeking to enlarge their strategic options are cozying up to new centers of power or to groupings like Brics. Brics represents above all a widespread yearning to pluralize the global order. That's the reason why, despite these unprecedented US-led sanctions against Russia, trying to isolate and squeeze Russia, 36 countries today are in Kazan at the Brics summit, showing the failure of the Western strategy to isolate any important player like Russia.
Okay. Sushant Sareen, let me bring you on this. As we speak, the Brics GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, 2023 that is ahead of G7. India's own trading arrangement with BRIC partners, the volume of trade that is significantly higher than G7 and EU combined. But there are a lot of people who keep saying that, look, the more you sort of do business with BRICS, the more out of favor you will be with the more important partner in the West and the flotilla of democracies that you naturally are aligned towards. How do you respond to those cynics, those critics who say this?
So, Rahul, I think there's an element of truth in what they are saying, that, if the relationship with the BRICS countries or the relationship within the BRICS nations becomes very deep and to the detriment of our other trading partners, then of course there will be certain repercussions. And if of course there is a greater strategic alignment within the BRICS countries, then of course there will be certain repercussions. I think that's a no-brainer. We will see the West also trying to push us around a bit. Not that they don't do it otherwise, but that's something that, the West has been so used to its own exceptionalism that they think they can, it's still the same world which was there in the 1940s or maybe even 100 years before that. And the world has actually taken a turn. But again, I would also, when you drop these kind of numbers, I think you also need to break down those numbers and see where exactly that trade is coming from. If you remove India's trade with China, for example, and in the case of Russia, that trade volume has only grown because of the energy trade which is taking place between India and Russia. Before that, it was only around $14-15 billion, maybe even less, maybe around $10 billion. But after that, it's gone up to about $60-70 billion. So if you start breaking down those numbers and you start looking at the kind of engagements we have, whether it's with the BRICS countries or with the West, I think the nature of those engagements is vastly different. Of course, as BRICS expands, there will be a whole lot of other countries which will join in, with which we have very deep engagement, for example, in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it is important to understand that, we don't really want to take any sides. We want to have our strategic options open up, but it's not as though, and I think the Indian side has made it very clear, it's not that we are anti-West, but we are not West. And we don't want to be pushed around by the West to take certain positions or to fight their wars for them. We don't want to do that. We don't expect the West to fight our wars for us. We don't want to fight their wars for them. So I think we need to be very clear about where we are going to go with it, especially because, and now this is critical, that as of now, while there are a lot of people making a beeline for BRICS, what exactly is the framework within which the BRICS operates? Apart from the BRICS Bank and a couple of other things, what is that big framework within which BRICS is now going to be a leading bloc of nations, which will be a kind of, alternative to the Western dominated world order? And I think there is no clarity on that as yet. Until that clarity comes, until there is a certain deepening of the relationships, and some of the more, the bigger problems, for example, between India and China, as long as they stay on the table, I don't see how we can get in very deep with this grouping.
Well, we'll unpack all of this. Let me bring in Mr. Wagma. Mr. Wagma, thank you very much for speaking to me. I want to continue the thread. And I want to ask you, has the West's overreach and adventurism led to a backlash? And that backlash is now crystallizing in the growth, in the membership of BRICS. Clearly, the Prime Minister's enthusiastic support for Putin is also a clear message to the United States. And I'm talking about Prime Minister Modi. And of course, the MEA is holding a press conference. We'll go to it in just a few moments once we understand what the salient points are. But Mr. Wagmar, this is a concern.
Speaking of the word concern, I'm glad you took the words from my mouth, Rahul. And when the MEA conference opens up in a few minutes, I do hope there's some progress on those 9 Indian cadavers returning from Russia who were forcibly pressed into the Ukraine war, and which India has been pretty tactful about and not discussed. Not to mention the Kerala State Minister, who has time and again brought it up with the Indian Foreign Secretary, of scores of Keralites who have gone to fight in Ukraine and against Ukraine and have taken up Russian permanent residency, having been given that by Moscow, having had a change of heart now to wish to return home. Why is Moscow dragging its feet on that with such an evergreen ally as New Delhi is? And let's really talk money, Rahul, even putting those aspects and other such sentimentality aside. Though, of course, there is a human element to it with those who died and were tricked into dying, taken in by these manpower agencies from Dubai, ostensibly to work in Russia. Why are Indian public sector units, Oil India, ONGC Videsh, Bharat Petroleum, etc., stuck and not receiving their $900 million PSU dividends in Russian banks? And they are held in rubles. They're not held in foreign currency. But the fact that a paltry 900 million has time and again been brought up by Indian dealers through the Indian ministries, but Russia drags its feet in not remitting them. But then that would make sense, Rahul, given that this very month, October 2024, Russia was reduced to bartering, which it has been doing for quite a while with North Korea for horses and all that sort of stuff, straight out of the early medieval era. This very month, Russia imported citrus fruits from Pakistan, and guess what they exported to Pakistan in return? Dal and chana, chickpeas and lentils. So that's what we are talking about where Russia is. And as regards this Brics forum that we're talking about, since June 2009 and its inception, I haven't seen a formal secretariat or a constitution evolve. 15 years on, you don't have a basic office and mechanism, rules and protocol in place. I repeat, there is no secretariat in place. There is no trade mechanism in place. At the Johannesburg summit, there was talk of a Brics common currency. Nothing has come of it despite blandishments in the declaration. And what has happened after 2015 is the NDB New Development Bank offered up as an alternative to the Bretton Woods IMF system, which is Shanghai-based and yuan-based. And I cannot for the life of me see India wanting to adopt yuan-based transactions in times to come. Some others would, like Bangladesh and others who have joined the NDB, but not India as such. And of course, yuan-based renminbi transactions also involve, needless to state, Chinese-style authoritarian capitalistic characteristics of governance. And I don't think the world's largest democracy after 78 years would be particularly enthused about doing so.
So your point being what? You've listed all these examples. You're saying that these are insincere partners, Russia, China.
That Brics, like SCO last week, remains a talking shop, but there is some merit, I repeat, some merit, Rahul, in being in the room than outside the room, because India does enjoy a complicated set of multilateral relationships with several countries.
It's interesting, Mr. Burzin Wagma, that you should make this point about Russia being insincere. Let me tell you what the EAM said yesterday, the External Affairs Minister. He says,
I heard it.
Russia has never, ever gone against Indian interests. And here you are seeming to suggest that, look, they exploited our soldiers and they're not giving us back our soldiers, etc., etc. Are you suggesting that countries that, okay, so are you suggesting citizens, are you suggesting that countries like the United States that turn a blind eye to Indian concerns over separatism have funded both Pakistan and other Indian enemies in the past, have sort of even brought in their big fleet to dissuade India from liberating Bangladesh, etc., more dependable allies? I'm not understanding what you're getting at.
10 years before the USS Enterprise came to the Bay of Bengal, as you just referred to, in '62, it was Kennedy who saved India's skin in the Sino-Indian conflict by airlifting arms and armaments. Right. For some reason, Indians have amnesia and don't talk about '62. And October '62, Rahul, is when the war commenced with China. In July '62, Khrushchev reneged on supplying MiG-21 aircrafts, which he had promised in the first instance. An MOU had been signed, and in July '62, he pulled the carpet. And of course, as Indira Gandhi once said, nations have constant interests, not constant allies and partners. It stands to reason that Russia and Pakistan have been conducting Druzhba military games exercises since 2016 too. Okay. And of course, so the point is, it's a talking shop.
It's a talking shop of vipers, if they could talk, that is. Brahma Chileni.
Well, I don't know where to begin after the last intervention. But let me remind the viewers that BRICS is an informal multilateral organization like the G20, the G7, the Shanghai Cooperation organization, none of these bodies has a permanent secretariat or a charter. So nobody has ever thought of a charter for BRICS because BRICS was not designed to be a formal institution like NATO. NATO is a charter-based formal institution. G7, G20, SCO, BRICS are informal multilateral institutions. So the fact that there's no permanent secretariat and no charter is what makes BRICS relevant to today's world. And as far as the new development bank is concerned, which is the BRICS Bank, this is the only multilateral lending organization in which its founding members have equal rights and equal vote. They're equal shareholders in the new development bank, the 4 founding members, which is India, China, Brazil, and Russia. By contrast, World Bank, take the World Bank. The US is the dominant shareholder of the World Bank and holds a veto power. And the New Development Bank certainly is not a yuan-based lending institution. What it does is very important, and this is only one step of how BRICS can create institutions. The only unfortunate part about the New Development Bank is that the idea was conceived by India, but China grabbed it, and it's now headquartered in Shanghai. But I think the broader issue that we have to keep in mind is that the Western decisions to weaponize finance and seize interest earned on frozen Russian central bank assets have caused deepening disquiet in the non-Western world, helping to build support in BRICS to explore alternative arrangements, including new cross-border payment mechanisms that are invulnerable to political pressures or interventions. Some countries are reassessing their heavy reliance on the US dollar in international transactions and reserve holdings. All this could aid the larger efforts to create non-Western mechanisms and arrangements. And I think that we should not minimize what BRICS is seeking to do. The BRICS is, of course, riven with internal divisions, so is the G7. But today, the BRICS is seen internationally as a credible alternative to the G7. We should not forget, I think, as you mentioned,
let me bounce that off. That's a very good point, because that leads me straight into the question. Is BRICS now perfectly poised? I'm saying it's not there. Poised to at least pose a challenge to the West's hegemony? That's the question I want to come back to with both Sushant Sareen, Ms. Kukareva, as well as Wagmar. So let me start with you, Wagmar, because you kicked you sort of kicked the ball out of the park, so to speak, by saying that it's a talk shop. But here's the question for you. It's poised to challenge the West's hegemony. Why is the West feeling so insecure? I mean, I sense that there is a certain amount of skepticism because it sort of arises out of a feeling of perhaps, I don't know, some sort of chastened righteousness, so to speak. I don't know. Explain.
It's not for the West to decide what these countries decide to do in the Global South. It is for the Global South to realize that ultimately it comes down to a Chinese show. And do you want a world run on Chinese cynic style governance and a yuan-based economy? It really does come down to that. And I don't see India enthusiastic about it. Maybe others are. Sino-Russian oil deals are happening in yuan. Sino-Iranian oil deals are happening in yuan, true. Perhaps even Sino-Bangladesh down the line. But the point is that do you want to see a world order led by Beijing rather than traditionally by DC and London, which for all its demerits and faults, and there are one too many blemishes to talk about,
are you saying that the US is concerned of the Chinese taking over the Global South and sort of infusing it with a bunch of cynical sort of practices, ideologies, etc.? Is that what you're saying?
No, what I am saying is that it is cynic characteristics of governance and authoritarian capitalism that are being offered by the Chinese.
Who feeds to such an extent the capitalist enterprise of China? It's America. How much have you actually reduced in total absolute trade terms your trade with China?
Or India, for that matter, which is completely in half to China.
Forget India for the moment.
But the point remains that...
I'm asking you, the West does so much business with China. Even now, it's over-leveraged. So in what way are you sort of punishing, for the lack of a better word, China. I see that there is a certain dissonance here between what you hope to say and what the West is doing.
Well, the cognitive dissonance is that in the global south, that for a variety of reasons, and there are individual nationalist or strategic reasons, that they cannot bring themselves to criticize the Ukrainian war. And that, yes, there have been other wars and the West has been hypocritical. But the ramifications of that have become evident.
The West walked out of Afghanistan, viewers. America walked out of Afghanistan and they left a hole this big of jihadis running amok.
Yes, and what is happening in Guyana as we
I don't
speak
remember
with Venezuela?
I don't remember Russia. One second. Let's just open this
No,
up.
I'm talking about Prigozhin and Russia and West Africa. You should speak to the
Look,
Niger
I'm only saying,
and
viewers,
Mauritanians.
I agree with you. I'm only saying, viewers, that India needs to have many friends. It can't just find itself being squeezed and muscled into the West because the West think that India will be this cat's paw and they want to work India up so that we can constantly be sort of at loggerheads with China. In fact, that situation might also ease itself. Okay, a big breaking news coming in. The Modi-Xi bilateral, just talking about China and improving ties, which will also, of course, at some level deprive the West of leverage, is taking place tomorrow. This is a massive development, viewers. Very, very big development. The Modi-Xi meeting at Brics will happen on Wednesday. This formally breaks the ice between the two countries. This meeting has not taken place at that level for a few years. If you remember, there were a large number of opposition parties in India who criticized Prime Minister Modi for shaking hands with Xi a few years back. In fact, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was in Southeast Asia. And they said you didn't show him, quote unquote, lalang. Now, viewers, with a bit of a thaw, these two leaders are back. This is very significant, as I was saying. And I want to bring in Sushant Sareen for some quick perspective on this. I'll bring you in, Ms. Kukreva, in just a few seconds. But Sushant Sareen, this is a big development. This meeting is taking place. It's been confirmed for tomorrow. I think it's happening in the afternoon.
So, Rahul, I think this meeting was being expected, once we announced that some kind of a deal has been struck on the border to bring down the tension and, some of the standoffs which are occurring in eastern Ladakh, that some of the outstanding issues have been sorted out. While I think we need to be careful to understand these are very tiny baby steps which have been taking place and a lot more needs to be done. I only wonder whether this meeting which takes place tomorrow is just for optics, or does this actually, or has something been worked out which will actually, give us some kind of a roadmap on how the two countries plan to address rest of the outstanding issues as far as the border management is concerned. And then, of course, is the larger issues. I don't think that is going to happen tomorrow. The larger issue of how India and China are going to reset their relationship and then take it forward. And I think that is going to be critical also from the point of view of Brics. I agree with what Mr. Wagmar is saying, that look, if you want Brics to be successful, number one, I think a comparison with G7 is odious. There is no comparison, simply because regardless of what we might say that it's informal, it's a club, say what you will about G7, the countries in the G7 very closely coordinate the economic policies and the strategic policies, right? And yes, America is the Chaudhary of that group. It calls the shots, but the others also get a say to it, in it. And they are willing allies of the Americans in that particular grouping. What will happen in the case of Brics? Will India ever kowtow to China? Will India, for example, as Mr. Wagner asks the question, do we want a China-centric economic order in which the Chinese are going to be calling the shots? Forget about Brics Bank that everybody has an equal partnership or equal shareholding. But we know how the Chinese operate. Brahma more than anybody else knows how the Chinese operate. Do we want something like that? Are we going to be comfortable with it? And a whole lot of other countries which come in. So yes, we have a very close relationship with Russia, a relationship which we value, a relationship which we would want to deepen even more. But, if there is a China factor involved in this, and of course a couple of other countries, then there are going to be issues. There are going to be problems. So you cannot replicate the
Will
G7
there be more? Will there be greater? That's the fundamental question. Will there be greater than the ones that we have periodically also with the West, when they sort of morally lecture us, put sanctions when we tested a nuclear weapon, this, that, the other? Anyhow, I'll come to that 1 second. I just also want to bring in Ms. Kukreva. Ms. Kukreva, this question about the BRICS becoming really the workshop of China and China calling the shock. And therefore, India mustn't really throw in its lot there and must perhaps subjugate its interest to a shop run by the Americans, because somehow the Americans are nicer and they are speak our language and this, that, the other. How do you respond to that?
Well, Rahul, this is certainly it's just a classic example of actually American narrative that we're hearing from Mr. Wagmar. The US, I've been following US politics and covering US politics for years now. And the one thing that we need to understand is that they only always need an enemy. There has to be one, scarecrow to scare everybody into into submission, into alliance, take it as you please. So to discredit something, you only need to say, look, well, okay, BRICS, we've been laughing at it for several years. Now they're doing something and doing something extremely important. But look, China is dominating proceedings, because if you take China as something that you put out as the enemy here, then you kind of discredit the whole organization, which is exactly what I talked to you about in the very beginning. The thing that is so extraordinary about BRICS bloc is the fact that these are countries who can come together. And who can come together as equals. We don't need one enemy of the state to scare everybody else into submission. Let me give you some numbers. While we're comparing BRICS to G7, which is, yes, it is an inevitable comparison, but let's not forget, G7 was formed in 1975.
Yeah.
It has been quite some years, since then.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, according to Russia's central bank, the exchanges in national currencies have gone up to 85% between BRICS countries. This is the most important thing, the only thing that we can talk about here, because we can talk about, BRICS are on talk and no action, but the exchanges in national currencies that undermine the US dollar, severely undermine the US dollar, and the American hegemony on the international economic stage. Mm-hmm. This is extraordinary.
Right.
This is a completely different game we're playing here. We can talk about BRICS not having a charter, not having a constitution, but this is not what it's about. The UN has a charter. How much is India really represented and really listened to in the UN?
Oh, that's a good point. That is a good point. There are no arguments there. I think you've scored a great point. Okay. Well, one second. Now, viewers, let's just look to tomorrow, because we will, towards the end of the show, also look back to today, where India has also, of course, spoken to the Iranian president, as well as, of course, President of Russia, Vladimir Putin. But I'll come to that in just a few moments. Let's just focus on the Chinese story. The Chinese have confirmed that there has been a breakthrough that ensures that the deadlock at Ladakh has ended. The statement from China confirms the claim made by EAM Jaishankar, who said that the positive agreement between the two sides ensures that the situation along the LAC in the Ladakh corridor has returned to what existed in 2020 and that the disengagement process has been completed. This is a statement put out by China. India and China have maintained close communication through diplomatic and military channels regarding border-related issues. The two sides have reached a solution on relevant matters, which China views positively. In the next phase, China will work with India to implement the solution plan, unquote. The breakthrough is a vindication, some people are saying, for more diplomacy. They say the NDA stood its ground and went toe-to-toe with China at the frigid heights, wearing the dragon down. The strategy proved only iron can actually cut iron. Here's what the breakthrough means. There'll be a disengagement at the remaining face-offs at Depsang and Demchok in Ladakh. That's the hope. China troops will no longer actively block Indian soldiers at the bottleneck area in the Depsang Plains, 18 kilometers inside India's own territory, and vice versa. Relocation of temporary posts that both sides had set up in Depsang Plains, disengagement in Charding Ninglung Nala track junction near Demchok in the south. All of this, of course, needs to be fleshed out, viewers. But there is hope that all of this will happen, and two sides will coordinate patrols and limit it to about 15 soldiers each to avoid confrontation. So this is what the breakthrough could, in the near term, look like. Of course, the long term is that one has to move towards disengagement. One will have to also try and fix this boundary issue that has been, as you know, viewers, a millstone around both the necks of China and India for now 70 odd years since they gained independence. So let's open this up. I want to bring in Brahma Chilani. I also want to bring in Vincent Gao. There's, of course, Sushant Sareen there. Brahma Chilani, I know we cannot read too much into all of this. But what do you think led China to suddenly concede, suddenly at this point in time? Please explain, because for 4 years, we've seen them behave very truculently. There hasn't been much movement. The EM has come out and said we have a very stressed relationship. And then suddenly we have what appears to be some sort of a thaw.
Rahul, what has China conceded?
Okay.
That's the first question we need to ask. Or what has India conceded? What have been the concessions on India's part? Even the details of what has been agreed upon is not clear. In fact, there's a disconnect in India between the statement made by the Indian Foreign Minister yesterday and the commencement made today by the army chief. Yesterday, Jaishankar said that we have returned to the pre-2020 situation and that disengagement is complete. Today, the army chief says the opposite. He says, we want to return to the situation that prevailed before April 2020. Thereafter, he said, we will think about disengagement, de-escalation, and normalcy at the LAC. So look at the discrepancy between these two statements. As far as the Chinese statement is concerned, it is a terse statement that came a day late. It reveals nothing, doesn't even mention patrolling agreement between the two sides. So I think we should be very cautious, not to hype what understanding has been reached between the two sides. What is important is that they have made an important step. That step is designed to reduce tensions, and we can hope that this will be part of a process to at least significantly lower tensions, because some things cannot be undone. For example, the permanent warfare-related infrastructure that China has now built along the entire Himalayan frontier with India, that cannot be undone. And the face-offs are not just at Depsang and Demchok, Rahul. They are face-offs also in other areas, including the Sikkim-Tibet border, the Arunachal-Tibet border, for example. And in fact, Jaishankar said yesterday, he said it's not just Depsang and Demchok. There are other areas too. So we don't know as to what has been agreed upon by the two sides. The last time last time the two sides agreed upon something was to create these buffer zones. But no details were released intentionally, because these buffer zones have come up largely on Indian territory. Okay. So that's why we should not hype the latest understanding.
Right. Sushant Sareen, it seems to me that a lot of people are skeptical because China is fundamentally undependable.
Look, it's not just about China being undependable. It's a question is that in these kind of matters, you don't really trust anybody until you can verify it on the ground. And even when you verify it on the ground, there has to be a constant vigil. Now, I agree that many of the details of the latest understanding that has been reached are not very clear. We've got snatches of information, dribbles of it coming out in various newspaper reports and other reports, but we don't have any official account of what exactly has transpired and what exactly is the roadmap to a kind of normalization. Secondly, and I think more critically, is what Brahma points out, that there has been really no concession as such. There's just an understanding which has been reached. And frankly, the bottom line is that the Chinese have it's an old Chinese ploy that they first, take two steps, they take a couple of steps forward, then they take one step back, and they've still gained ground. So I think we need to be very careful about how the Chinese operate. Now, it's all very well to say that, look, there are these suspicions, etc., etc. But look, there is a lived experience, and the lived experience is that when have the Chinese ever been fair or nice or friendly towards us? Yes, we do business with them. Yes, there are a number of, international forums in which we are together in those forums. But let's face it, when have the Chinese ever been friendly towards us? They are building the China-Pakistan economic corridor over an area which is a sovereign Indian territory, might not be under India's control right now, and the Chinese have constantly propped up the Pakistanis to snap at India's heel. It's a loyal dog which snaps every time the master tells it to snap at India's heel. So clearly the Chinese have followed a policy which is not exactly going to inspire any confidence in India, and I don't see any reason why we need to mince our words about what the Chinese game plan has been. Again, let me come back to BRICS, because it's in that backdrop this entire conversation is taking place.
True.
The reason why I keep bringing in the BRICS and I keep bringing in China in this whole thing is that whatever understanding you want to reach in the BRICS is going to come crashing down on the rocks of reality of Chinese behavior with countries like India.
Good point.
At that point, there is no way we can go forward with it, regardless of what anybody else might say.
Yeah, that's the question.
Until and unless the Chinese change their strategy towards India, and as of now, it's inimical.
Victor Gao, let me bring you in. You want BRICS to succeed, but you don't want to facilitate the success. You want to, in fact, deny India a permanent seat in the UNSC. You eye our land. You are propping Pakistan. You have taken over parts of our land also with regards to POK. This is not helpful, and no one trusts you.
Thank you very much for having me. First of all, BRICS is a success story, and it's becoming more and more a bigger success story. It increased its membership from 5 to 10 last year. More countries are demanding their entry into BRICS. There are more than 30 countries waiting on the list, and you're talking about important countries which wants to join BRICS. And I think BRICS is an organization of some of the panelists compare the BRICS with G7. G7 is an organization of the past. BRICS is an organization of the future. And I think it's very encouraging that both China and BRICS, the two largest populations in the world, are BRICS members. And it is really to the credit of both the Chinese government and the Indian government to have reached this agreement about the border patrol. And we do not know the details, but let me assure you, more details will be forthcoming. It is always for China and India to talk about peace, to talk about using diplomacy to solve whatever problems there are between China and India. Now, on the other hand, are there territorial disputes between China and India? Of course there are. And we fought a border clash back in 1962. But let me assure my Indian friends, the border disputes between China and India are not created by India, neither were they created by China. These border disputes. It was created by the British Indian Empire. Where is the British Indian Empire? It's gone. It's in the dustbin of history. Neither China nor India should be held hostage by the Indian Empire under the British rule. We should be smarter than that.
Okay.
We should be able, for the Chinese people and the Indian people, have enough
we can't keep blaming the Brits. The Brits are gone. We need to sit across the table. But you need to create.
Rahul.
One second, Mr. Gao. 1 second. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. Just 1 second. Yes, Mr. Wagma, you want to come in?
Yeah, very briefly, Rahul. the Empire of India devolved into the Indian Union in 1947. India got the seat at the UN, as well as being incumbent upon all treaties that were signed from British India days to the treaties that India picked up as such. Governments and administrations may change. So the Chinese contention that it was an imperialist ploy with a similar conference of 1912 and 1913, and that China is not a signatory to it, is another matter and is not entirely tenable, because this is a fact of international relations that governments devolve and form their treaties and are inheriting legacies from the past, which are perfectly legitimate everywhere. And so that immediately answers that. Thank you, Rahul, for that intervention. And second point is just this, I want to leave again as a historian. Far from this Sino-Russian rapprochement over the Ukraine or this anti-Western axis that has been evolving in recent decades, it would be well and salutary for Indians to realize this, Rahul, that Gorbachev on his November 86 state visit on the last day at his press conference was very, very ambivalent, and he made it quite plain to the Indians that should there be another Sino-Indian showdown, Moscow could not be counted upon to assist India in any form. And I think Indians will do well to realize that. The realists among Indians, I'm sure Brahma and Sushant do, but there is a forlorn hope in certain coterie of Indian thinking which thinks that India can still bank upon a Putin or other successor in the future.
Let me ask that question on Ms. Kokareva.
That is not going to happen.
Yeah, I was in any case coming to that question.
And Gorbachev made that clear at the heyday of Indo-Soviet friendship on the eve of the Festival of India, which opened in January.
Two people want to get into this, Ms. Kokareva and Sushant Sareen. Okay, Ms. Kokareva, go first. Yes.
Rahul, let's just briefly remind our viewers that Mr. Gorbachev was the leader of the Soviet Union, which is not Russia. You know, the Soviet Union fell apart, and we right now are talking about Russia, which was not ever, run by Mr. Gorbachev. It's a different country. I'm sorry, but if we're talking about let's stop blaming the Brits, then let's stop mixing the two, The Soviet Union was a different story.
But there is a concern here. Look, under the Brics umbrella, under Mr. Putin's nose, are two countries, formidable powers in their own right, the most populous countries on this planet, that are not seeing eye to eye. How much can the Russians leverage their relationships on both sides to get these two to talk together? And should Russia be playing a more active role in dissuading China?
Rahul, we're talking about a meeting that has just been confirmed tomorrow, that you just yourself said that it is a massive, even if we're talking just about a meeting, there is still a step. There is no such thing as baby steps in politics. Especially in international politics. The fact that there will be a meeting means that Russia, however it is doing the job, is doing a good job. It is happening in Russia, on Russian soil, and we will have to wait and see what comes out of it. But just to, again, to come back to the lovely statements that we're making right here, about Mr. Gorbachev, about the rest of it. We've just had confirmation from the UN Secretary General's office that he is participating in this summit. So coming back to the beginning of our discussion, we can talk a big talk about Brics being just talk. The UN is coming. And that means that however the State Department is saying that this summit is not important, if the UN General Secretary is coming, then it is important. And they are keeping a close eye. And they are worried. I'm sorry.
Sushant Sareen. Yes, you wanted to come in.
On a lighter note, the UN Secretary General coming for a Brics meeting actually raises serious questions about how useful the meeting is going to be. Because given the personality of that guy, I have virtually zero faith on him. But aside from that,
that's a different story.
The question which Burzin Wagmer raises, look, it's not just about in the event, and I don't think either China is or India is stupid enough to try and get into a warlike situation, notwithstanding the tensions which exist. But let us assume a situation like that was to emerge. Maybe Russians will not come to our help. But will the Americans and will the Brits and will the others do?
No.
Number one. Number two, will they come and fight on our side, or will they do to us what they have done to the Ukrainians? That we'll keep giving you the weapons, you keep fighting against the Russians, you keep getting killed, you keep devastating your economy. Don't even try to enter into any kind of a peace agreement, a ceasefire. Do nothing of the sort. Keep fighting, keep getting your people killed. We'll keep giving you weapons, so that you fight, in a manner of speaking, you fight our war for us against the Russians. Why they want to fight the Russians, I don't know. Why they've been constantly wanting to poke the Russians, I have no idea. I have some idea, but I don't think this is the place to talk about it. But the bottom line is that forget about Russians coming to India's help. I don't think anybody else is going to do. So we have to be very clear. In the event of any conflict, we are on our own. And if we are thinking of getting into a conflict because somebody will be on our back, then I think it's better to surrender. Because nobody will come to our assistance.
Mr. Chileni, does this thaw, incipient as it might be, between India and China also, perhaps if it results in something more, deprive then the West of leverage? They keep sort of, the word scarecrow was used by Ms. Kukreva. So, the scarecrow is China. That's the one that is flagged, and India is told, better be careful. It might be right. I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying, would if the ties improve, would that leverage then capacity also decrease?
If China and India can ease their hostilities, it will work to the advantage of both Beijing and New Delhi. And that's the reason why both countries are seeking to reduce their tensions. It detracts from their global geopolitical objectives. After all, despite their bilateral disputes and sharpening geopolitical rivalry, at the global level, China and India do have some common geopolitical objectives, including creating non-Western institutions, mechanisms, and arrangements that are immune to political intervention of the kind that we have seen.
Yes.
For example, removing Russian banks from SWIFT system, or weaponizing finance, for example. The reason why gold prices today are at a record high is because many central banks in the non-Western world are holding gold as a hedging strategy, as they think of how they can reduce their heavy reliance on the US dollar. But so there are two things here. First, the influence of Brics is growing as it becomes a beacon for overhauling existing international arrangements, even as Brics faces some daunting challenges, including uniting as a more meaningful global force.
Yes.
On the other side, we have China and India. Now, these two countries make up more than a third of the global population. Now, if they can peacefully coexist and cooperate, it can change global geopolitics.
Okay.
But we know China, that China is a revisionist power that is seeking hegemony in Asia.
Okay. So, Mr. Gao, put your money where your mouth is. What do you think is going to come out tomorrow? Is there going to be a substantive shape given to this rapprochement? Will we have some details? Or do you think this is just going to be a pleasant photo op? Very quickly, sir, I have 30 seconds.
Thank you very much. First of all, let's hope and let's pray for a very positive outcome from the Xi-Modi summit in Kazan tomorrow. Secondly, it takes two to tango. Both China and India need to come in with our efforts to make sure that these two largest populations not only do the right thing for the Indian people, for the Chinese people, but for mankind as a whole. Third, I hope India will remain as a very loyal, very constructive, very important member of Brics. More than a decade ago, right now, and many, many years in the future, both China and India should play a very important role within the framework of Brics. If anyone in India says that he or she is a denial of Brics, I don't think it is in the fundamental interest of the people in India or the government in India, etc.
I have to leave it at
the
this.
The future of India.
We'll have to focus like hawks on that meeting tomorrow. Let me tell you, viewers, Washington will be tuning in. London will be agog. Even Ottawa, sitting wherever it is going to be tuning in. This is a fundamental and very, very important turn of events. India and China sitting across the table, viewers, is replete with significance and consequentiality. I'll leave it at this. We'll be tracking that tomorrow on the Hard Facts.
This Diwali, we want to shift our attention now to how the Indian airlines continue to grapple with a wave of bomb hoax threats for the 6th consecutive day today, disrupting flight schedules and causing a lot of inconvenience during this busy festive travel season. Today, 20 flights of Air India, Vistara, Indigo have received hoax calls over the last 24 hours. In fact, Civil Aviation Minister Ram Mohan Naidu has said that the ministry is looking at an amendment to the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against Safety of Civil Aviation Act to enable law enforcement agencies to invoke this law against people who make these hoax bomb threats about aircrafts at the airport. Now, he also said that the ministry was in the process of amending the rules to put people who are caught for making these calls on the no-fly list. That big announcement came in from the Civil Aviation Minister yesterday. We listen in first up.
Since the first day when it has been happening, and this is a process that we follow every time. Whenever there is a bomb threat case happening, or if it is through a call, or if it is through social media, or if it is through some other means, we have a strict protocol that we follow. Because for us, like I said, safety and security is the foremost aspect, and this we follow through the international guidelines itself. We have had multiple meetings. In the last 1 week, I have chaired certain meetings with all the necessary stakeholders within the ministry, and from the ministry we have thought of some legislative action also, if it is required, which direction should be moved in. And we have come to the conclusion that there are two areas that we can explore. One.
All right, let's quickly go across to our guest joining us this afternoon. This is aviation expert Sanjay Lazar joining us on the broadcast. Mr. Sanjay, appreciate you taking out your time. Thank you for speaking to us here on CNN News 18. Mr. Sanjay, if you can put in perspective, all that you've heard and seen so far. Over 70 plus flights have received these hoax bomb threats in just the last 2 weeks. That's become a daily affair and causing a lot of nuisance, not just to the passengers. Of course, they're at the receiving end of a lot of inconvenience, delay, so on and so forth. Makes it worse in an emergency situation. But also for the airlines, the operational costs also keep getting added up. So tell us a little bit about what you make of this entire menace that keeps coming to the fore on a daily basis now.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you for having me on your show. It's the 7th day, if I'm not mistaken, and to my count, I think we've already crossed 100. I maybe give or take a couple here. If you're saying we've had more than 20 today, it's highlighted a lot of things. Right from day one, a week ago, I've been on various media, and whether it's social media or writing or speaking on TV, that I think we've lacked a proactive response. The Ministry of Home Affairs should have been involved instantly. We kept dabbling, and then, of course, we, got lost. We said first it was pranksters, then we said, maybe somebody from inside. Now we find that they're being spoofed, and the VPNs are coming from Germany and the UK. This is something more serious. This is a very concerted effort to undermine India, its security, and make a fool of our cyber security premises, our aviation security. I do believe that given the multiplicity of agencies, and this is what I've said consistently over a week, you've got the Ministry of Home Affairs, you've got the Ministry of External Affairs involved, you've got the DIT, you've got the MOCA, that's the civil aviation, you've got the DGCA, the BCAS, the CISF, a number of we should have had a national federal agency like CBI or NIA or NSA, so looking into this, or IB or RAW, under the Ministry of Home Affairs, and we should have had a team, or the military intelligence. Any one of these agencies would have worked concertedly. Now, I think they're getting their act together and trying to do it. I believe BCAS DG had a meeting yesterday or the day before yesterday with all the CEOs, but I believe it's still short. We need to bring in all these social media companies bring them on and make them cooperate with us, I think a lot of steps need to be taken. The minister wants to change the law and tweak the law, I understand. But as per my, knowledge, there are adequate laws to deal with the punishments. I, for one, am not in favor of this flight ban and no-fly list. I think put them in jail. No-fly is a given, no-fly for life. Not 5 years, 2 years, 1 year. But I believe jail and,
But they're also mulling at, life imprisonment through this kind of a legislative action. So that's what you're also reiterating in a sense.
Well, actually, Christy, what I'd like to tell you is Section 3 of the Suppression of Unlawful Acts Against Aircraft 1982 prescribes life imprisonment already. Section 3 says anyone who makes a threat to an airport or an aircraft has to be put in jail for life. So that, that's what they should have looked at. The only difficulty here is they cannot identify whom to put in jail or whom to charge, for which you need, this is a cyber attack. Let's not, kid anybody, whether it comes through Twitter or whether it comes through Facebook or email or phone call. So you need to involve the relevant agencies, otherwise we're never going to get smarter. It could be the case, and I'll say this for the government, that, in the background, maybe all these...
Hello, Namaskar. This is First Post and you're watching Vantage with me, Palki Sharma. The focus tonight is on Kazan in Russia, where Brics leaders have gathered for a summit. Today, Prime Minister Modi met Russian President Vladimir Putin. Can they China-proof their ties? After yesterday's border breakthrough, will Prime Minister Modi also meet Chinese President Xi Jinping? Neither side has confirmed or denied. If they meet, it will be their first formal meeting in 5 years. And what's on the Brics agenda? As the group expands, is it becoming anti-West or an alternative to the West? We'll discuss all of that. In West Asia, Israel has arrested 14 people who were spying for Iran. These are Israelis on Tehran's payroll. We'll bring you their full story. Also looking at why America is infamous for